This is a review of what we read today in Heart of Darkness in 11 Honors Literature. And we start on page 75 and we read to page 83. And we answered the questions number 12 through 17. And so I thought I would review that with you now as the video for today. On page 75, the last thing we looked at was question number 11, and we learned that, Marlowe learns that Kurtz was an artist, among many things that he is talented at, and the picture was a picture of a woman draped and blindfolded carrying a lighted torch. And we discussed this as meaning that the picture, the woman, represented Europe and represented imperialism, and she was blindfolded and carrying a torch, which was an incongruous sight because she couldn't see where she was going, and yet she was bringing a torch so that others might see, which is a great, really, parallel to imperialism, where the Europeans were trying to civilize the so-called uncivilized countries, and yet they themselves were blind to their own flaws. What we learned there is that more about Mr. Kurtz, all of it up to this point, is very positive. He learns from one of the agents there at the central station as Marlowe is trying to get his steamboat fixed. He has a conversation with one of the agents, and the conversation turns to Mr. Kurtz, and words like he is a prodigy, an emissary of pity, science, progress. He began to declaim suddenly for the guidance of the cause entrusted to us by Europe, and higher intelligence, special being. These are the terms that he uses to describe. All these are positive terms about Kurtz and reflect the Kipling poem, The White Man's Burden, which was the belief that these people were there, the Europeans were there to civilize the Africans, when we know, in fact, that wasn't, for most Europeans, that wasn't the main reason they were there. We'll move on to question number 14, where he talks about, that is, on page 77, or actually page 77, yes. What does Marlowe mean when he wonders if they can handle this big, dumb, deaf thing where the darkness was, where Kurtz was? And what he means is that the darkness is a tangible thing which is bigger than they are, and he wonders if they can handle it. He's beginning to see that Africa does change people. That's page 77. And then we find out at the bottom of page 78 that, again, we hear another comment about Kurtz being a universal genius. But we learn that what Marlowe was missing, what he needed, was rivets. He talks on page 79 about the fact that 200 miles east, or that is west, near the coast, there were plenty of rivets. They were where they weren't needed. Where they're needed, there weren't any. And this is another example of the waste and inefficiency of imperialism. And I thought it was fascinating, the remark on page 79 where Marlowe said, I said I could see that very well, but what I wanted was a certain quantity of rivets. And rivets were what Mr. Kurtz wanted if he had only known it. It's really profound because we learned that Mr. Kurtz has all these skills and gifts and talents and intelligence, but we learn later that, of course, we know he's after ivory. Ivory is a decoration and people have to be killed, have to be subjugated, animals have to die in order to get ivory. Rivets build things, they make things, they don't cause problems, they actually solve problems, and they fix things that are broken, and they build. So this is another example of the waste And so he's waiting for rivets. On page 80, he talks about work, and at the top of the page, on page 80, he said, no, I don't like work. I'd rather laze about and think of all the fine things that can be done. I don't like work, no man does. But I like what is in the work, the chance to find yourself, your own reality for yourself, not others. You see this theme in the book about reality versus illusion, and the closer they get to the heart of darkness, the more illusory things begin to look to see. Things don't seem as real, they seem otherworldly. And every time Marlowe is around people, or in one case he finds a book, in this case he's talking about rivets, he sees things that are useful. He longs for the useful, the practical, on the one hand, versus the illusory and really damaging or dangerous, on the other hand, of darkness. So that's why he likes work. The Pilgrims, question number 15, and we've seen the term before. The Pilgrims are Europeans that have come here in order to search for ivory, and they're called pilgrims because there's a religious connotation there. The thing is, they're called faithless pilgrims. Their religion is greed and power and ivory, all wrapped up in the idea of ivory because it was so valuable. And so they almost worship it. That's what makes them pilgrims. They follow it, they worship it, they bow down to it, like pilgrims. But of course, it's not really a religious, but it is a idol worship. And so we find that the manager's uncle shows up with something called the El Dorado Exploring Exposition on 82. And these are groups of people that have come into the jungle for one purpose, and that is to exploit it. These are Europeans. And one of the uncle of the manager is the head of it. So it says that they have no moral purpose at the back of it other than burglars breaking into a safe. They've come to steal and not to produce anything. And finally, why does the manager resent Kurtz? He resents Kurtz because he's afraid of him. Kurtz is a man that's going to have power someday. He already has some. And the manager will work for him someday. Plus, he might lose his job for him. What we find later also is that the manager resents the methods that Kurtz is using because they are not prescribed methods, and they are hurting the company as a whole, but they are enriching Kurtz. So this is a summary of the almost 8 pages we read today. We'll start tomorrow, read some tomorrow, start on page 85. Hope this is a helpful review.